Welcome to the Intentional Encourager podcast, where each episode brings you compelling conversations and stories designed to entertain, enlighten, and encourage. And now here's your host, Brian Sexton.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. You know what's really important to me when I do business with a company is trust and transparency. I've been telling you now for a good while about my buddy Damon Burton and his company, SEO National, because trust and transparency are just as important to them. You know, for the last 15 years, in the search engine optimization space, they have been leading the way and serving people tremendously well. Now, for those of you that don't know what SEO is, it stands for search engine optimization. It helps you show up higher on Google searches so that folks that are looking for what you have find you quicker. And you know what's really encouraging? More revenue, more sales, growing your business. Do me a favor, get in touch with Damon and his team today at SEO National at 855-736-6285 or go to SEOnational.com and get your free quote and tell them you heard it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. I hope you're ready, because here comes a dynamite conversation on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
And welcome into the Intentional Encourager podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sexton. Thank you for joining us again today. Got a question for you. Do you know what a people development strategist is? I have to admit that I do not, but I know someone who does. She is a people development strategist. You can find her on LinkedIn at Elena, E-L-E-N-A, Pastore, P-A-S-T-O-R-E, but you can find her right here, right now, on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Elena Pastore. Elena, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am well. I like to start every podcast here because, again, as we continue to navigate through these uncertain times, I don't know what, I always try to find, what's life been like the last, and it's hard to believe that we're coming up on almost 2 years.
I know.
When the pandemic hit.
I know.
So take me through the last 21 months or so in your world, how it's been for you, and what's a lesson that you have learned from this whole situation that once we're out of this, you'll carry through?
All right. Well, I guess for sake of ease, I'll take you through the last 24 months rather than 21. So 24 months ago, I graduated with my master's degree from the University of Florida in business. So that was December of 2019. And at the time, I was working for a small business and a startup, both of which had missions and visions that really aligned with me and what I wanted to do. Long story short, the pandemic disrupted a lot of our lives for a lot of different, reasons and in a lot of different ways. And for me, with the startup not really working out, unfortunately, I decided to start my own business doing leadership and career coaching. And yes, I am a people development strategist is what I call myself, because I like to develop people and help them be the best they can be and have the greatest impact in their careers, which of course, carries into their personal lives as well.
When you think about you go to work for the startup and you've got one trajectory, one course that you're going in, you're thinking, okay, this is good. This is what I want to do. This is what aligns with where I am. And then all of a sudden you kind of have to pivot. Take me through the kind of the thought process there, because I know how I would be at my age pivoting. A lot of people pivot differently at different stages of their lives. For you, what was it like for you to have to pivot that quickly after feeling like you were going to be somewhere that really aligned with what you wanted to do and how you wanted to do it?
It was a very gradual process before I really realized I needed to pivot, and before I fully accepted that I had to. A lot of times when you really invest in something and or in denial when you slowly realize it's not working out and you want it to work out, but you have to do something about it and accept, the reality that is in front of you. But before that, in March of 2020, I took a pay cut with the startup to mostly work for equity. So I was mostly working for equity before the pandemic. And then the pandemic hit.
So what was that like to have to flip your
crazy.
mindset? Because you come out of, most people when they come out of either getting their bachelor's or their master's have an idea of, okay, I'd like to be in this salary range. I wanted this and that. What was it about the startup that you went to work for that you said, hey, I think in equity, because that is an unusual way, one, to start, but two, to kind of to take that entry point. What was it for you that made you just kind of go, okay, this feels like the right thing for me to do, taking equity over salary?
So I had started with them a year prior in January of 2019, part-time while I was still in my undergrad. And, like I mentioned before, so I guess I should mention the goal of the startup was an education technology company where they were building a software, an app that would help students develop their soft skills, track and develop their soft skills. And to me, that was everything. I believe soft skills are so important. I believe in helping people develop their soft skills, capitalizing on their soft skills, knowing how to apply their soft skills. So I felt very aligned with the purpose that company was trying to achieve. And I really believe in the long game, which was why I said I would rather give up the short-term money since I don't have a family. I'm not, I don't have big financial liabilities. So to me, I felt like I can handle the loss of the salary for the equity because I think it's a better long-term strategy. So that's what my thought process was.
So, I have a 21-year-old son, and I agree with you that a lot of times when, especially as you get, and I'll call them kids because I'm much older, but but you look at 15, let's say high school years, 15, 16, 17, 18, where you're really trying to prepare to go to college. Now here's what I will say in kind of taking the conversation this way. I think you're 100% right, is that a lot of times we train and teach to the academic things that you need for college. But we don't train, teach, and coach to the soft skills that you will need once that part of your life is over, that college doesn't seem to develop. And I'm not trying to, politicize it or anything like that.
Right.
What I would say, Elena, is having in my past, working with high school students, recruiting them for college, I think you're 100% right in the fact of, what, here, let's go here for a minute. To me, I believe that we need to teach high school students how to connect beyond their cell phone, right? So true connection is not just hitting a button to follow someone or to friend request them on Facebook. It really takes developing those interpersonal skills to really understand what connection is all about. It's developing those, study habits are great, but what are you going to do with the application of that? And so where did that really resonate with you to say, this is something that I can help develop? Because especially, and I love what you just said about the startup using the technology to see a need and help develop that need. Where was that resonance for you, and how did that develop in you to say, this is something that I can align to, and this is something really valuable that I feel like that I can add my skills and talents to help them move the ball down the field?
Yeah, there's a lot of great things there. So back at that point when I was in this position, and then now with my clients that I have now, I see this common denominator, which is there's a huge lack of awareness around what skills are deemed important and how you recognize how you either have them or don't have them within yourself. So even with my clients that are, adults that have been in the workforce for 20 or 30 years, people find it very difficult to articulate their intangible skills that they have, especially when, kids or high schoolers are kind of more in a stage where they're being molded. I believe that there's a greater opportunity to kind of step in there and kind of be more of a teacher in the sense of showing them how they can develop these skills and why they should be important down the road. So the purpose of the app the app was built. So the purpose of that was to not only help these students develop the competencies where they needed growth, but also to realize how they are actually developing those, even though they might not be aware of how that's happening. Mm-hmm. So really connecting the dots from them into what they have, what they want to grow into, and then of course, then applying that to a field or a career down the road.
Well, and again, you've hit on something really important there. I love what you said about a lot of people not understanding where their skills truly lie. And I'll be honest, I wasn't real aware of my own until I did a strengths finder a few years ago and said,
"Oh, awesome.
I did a Clifton,
I love that."
Yeah, Clifton Strengths Finder. And it was recommended by a dear friend of mine. And she said, listen, just try this out. You're going to be surprised at what you find. And I was surprised that some things that I thought were strengths were a little bit further down the line. Some things that I thought, well, I'm not that good at were actually strengths. Do you find that people that you work with have those same V8 moments that I call them, where they just kind of go, I wasn't aware? And what's the one thing that you see from folks? What is that aha moment? What does it look like when they find a strength they didn't feel like was a strength previously?
Yeah, there's a lot of great things we could dig into there. So I use StrengthsFinder for myself with my clients. I love the assessment so much. There's so many great ways that you can learn from it and apply it. So I think it's great that you brought that up. So yeah, a lot of StrengthsFinder builds awareness in the people that take it for a lot of reasons. So like you said, things that you didn't realize were strengths. So a lot of times we assume because I like this and I'm good at this, therefore everyone else must also like this and be good at this. Therefore, everyone wants what I want, and I'm not special, and and on and on. But we realize that a lot of the things, like I love, public speaking, talking to large groups. And I know that that's something a lot of people have a fear of. So that's more of a clear-cut example. But there are a lot of other things like that say I assume everyone else likes it too. And therefore, I don't realize it's a strength of mine. So that's one way that StrengthsFinder kind of helps people understand
Elena,
themselves.
Let me jump in there because I think you're hitting on something that's really, really important. And that is that we now have a society. When you talk about, I like what everybody else likes. I assume everybody else likes this. We've kind of built that around social media. So the thought of, okay, if I post a picture and it gets this many likes, or it gets this many shares, or it gets this many, we've kind of quantified the definition of what we think good looks like, or we think a strength looks like. In other words, we've kind of put a number to it. Instead of saying, this is what I know about me that I do well, whether anybody likes it or not.
Right.
Now it almost becomes a numbers game of, okay, I thought I did this well, but I only got this many likes, this many shares, this many retweets, this many that.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost kind of takes us in a direction of quantifying something that's really not quantifiable.
Mm-hmm.
How do people get away from trying to quantify strengths instead of qualifying their strengths? Because, and here's why what we kind of want to set that up is that, to me, when qualifying a strength means, yes, I know this about me and I can verify it through something like a strengths finder. I know this to be true and I can verify it instead of trying to quantify it with a number. Am I going in the right direction there? I'm curious about that thought.
Yeah, so I've never really thought about it like that. But if you want to talk about qualitative versus quantitative and, how many people like what I like.
Yeah, let's go there. Let's go there for a second. Because, again, I think a lot of people try to get caught up in a numbers game in trying to say, I'm going to put a number on my strengths instead of saying, no, this is what I know that I'm good at. This is what I know about myself.
Yeah, the first thing that I would say, sounds fairly simple, is what you alluded to, which is taking other people out of the equation. So how other people feel about it, just take that out of the equation entirely, or try not to think about it. And obviously that's much easier said than done, but taking it from, really trying to focus on yourself, because I think those kind of quantitative measures come in when we start to bring other people in. And if we don't bring other people into what we are trying to do, then I think it's easier to think about it more qualitative and just about ourselves. The other piece of it is to help us think about it in a more qualitative and therefore a more unique kind of way to ourselves. I think is to look at again, if we're using StrengthsFinder as an example, looking at your strengths in pairs or as a group. So to give a little bit of context for those of you listening that might not know what StrengthsFinder is, it's an assessment that tells you your what they deem as your top 5 strengths out of a bank of 34 strengths. So there's 34 possible strengths, and they tell you what your top 5 are based on your responses. So let's say, for example, so my number 1 is includer. So let's say, Brian, you also have includer. And then we say, oh, on our team of 10, 5 people have includer, right? And then that's how you slowly start to identify it as a number. But if I say, oh, wait, I have includer and positivity, but you have includer and analytical, your includer and analytical will work together much differently than my includer and positivity.
Yeah.
Because you might think about, oh, I analyze different data sets and I look at historical numbers, and you're including all the different types of figures when you're analyzing something. And if I look at includer and positivity, I'm thinking of, oh, I'm looking at all the events in my life and something bad might have happened, but my positivity allows me to see those inclusive events together as something that has meaning.
I may want to look at analytical data, and I may want to say, okay, I'm an includer, but I like to incorporate analytical data into that part of my strength.
Yeah.
Well, while you may look at it and go, oh, data, and just eye roll like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Don't bring all that. And I'm kind of, and to be honest, Elena, I'm kind of like that. I'm more kind of like, I can appreciate analytical data, but tell me what it says. I don't want to break down a spreadsheet. I don't want to do that. Just tell me what it says. And I think that is so good, because again, I think we fail a lot of times. We try to say, okay, we're in the same group, and because we're in the same group, we must think alike. We must, we're going to get along.
Right.
And I love where you've gone and diversified that and said, wait a minute. Yeah, we're in a group, but you're in one subset and I'm in another subset.
Right.
And it's okay, because we can find some common ground that works well for us. to function in. Let's take a quick break. I want to park there for just a minute, because when we come back, I want to dive in a little bit further to how people develop themselves and and I love what you said about looking at your own strengths and focusing there, because, Elena, a lot of times, let me just save that. Let me save that part of the conversation. I want to go there, but let's take a quick break. And we come back, we're going to talk about keeping yourself grounded, keeping all the other noise out, keeping yourself grounded. This is a great conversation. I love where we're going with this. Elena Pastore joins me, a people development strategist. You got to stay tuned, because I'm telling you, there's going to be more good stuff coming here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton here. The new year is upon us, and you may be sitting there thinking, hey, I would really love to pay off some debt, or I would like to save for that dream vacation. Maybe you want to buy a new car. Whatever it is you want to do financially in the coming year, let me give you a great piece of intentional encouragement and something to think about that might help you do it. Products for Profit. Now, this is a course taught by my good friend Joe Hart, who's been a guest on the Intentional Encourager podcast and has told his story how reselling changed his life. And you know what, folks? It could do the same thing for you too. It's really simple. Reselling is basically buying a product and then reselling it online for more money. And Joe is going to take you through the steps and show you how to do this either part-time, or maybe, as some of his students have done, take this full-time as well. Go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP. And oh, by the way, this group is going to help you find leads of products that are profitable right now, give you all kinds of great intentional encouragement, and you're going to be surrounded by a community of people that are going to want to see you be successful in the reselling game. Again, go to coachjoe89.gumroad.com/L/premium PFP and tell him you heard about it on the Intentional Encourager podcast. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Elena, before we took a break, and I was trying to stop myself. I was trying to stop myself, because I think a lot of times we are so quick to try to get the approval, the applause, the validation of other people. And this is where I believe social media has really almost crippled us as a society. And again, it seeps into a company as well too, because you were talking a few moments ago about working with people and different clients, and it tends to seep into companies too, because now people, their validation is not what they themselves produce. It's what they believe other people think of what they've produced. Go there for a minute. I know I see you. If you're watching this on YouTube, Elena is chomping at the bit. So I'm going to back off and let her answer that question.
Yeah, that's a big one, because that's something that I struggled with myself when starting my business. I felt like I had a lot of great subject matter expertise. I knew what I was doing. I had the right experience, everything like that. But I didn't understand the difference between being confident in what I felt I had to offer and seeking validation from external people, whether it be clients, whether it be mentors, whether it be someone that I deemed as, I guess, a role model of what I wanted to be. So I said, and I still believe, I think I'm one of the most confident people I know. I am confident in what I'm doing. I'm confident in my, all that stuff. But when it comes down to executing, I would mistake, I guess, validation for feedback. So I'm always seeking I recognize that we can always improve, and when anything we do, we can always get better at, no matter who you are, what your work is, what your field is, personal, professional, we can always get better, but I mistook that feedback and I was placing it as validation. Did I word that right?
It makes
Does that make
perfect
sense?
sense. And here's where I was, what I was kind of thinking as you were talking about that. A lot of times there are two types of confidence. There is internal confidence in ourselves, or to your point about validation, is that the confidence is boosted or maybe, inflated, I'll say, by what other people or how other people say, what we get from other people. So in other words, and here's a couple of things. Here's a couple of examples, and I want to kind of run these by you and get your thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, people are confident in us when we start a business, because you're talking about starting a business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're confident as long as they're not invested. They're confident in you, but if it came to putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak, they would be like, oh, well, I don't, I didn't really want to invest. There's that confidence until it costs something. I guess that's a better way to phrase it. The other way that I would say is this, and I don't know if you're like this, Elena, but imagine for a minute, there are some people that are so comfortable in their own skin. They're free and easy. They're just carefree and easy. And it's like, you know what? We'll just, and here's the example I'll make is this. Is one thing that I love about and admire about my wife. My wife's a barefoot girl. She doesn't care. She just does not care. And you have a lot of people like that just go through life and go, I don't care. And it, by the same token, if you put hot coals in front of them, they would be just as fine and just as confident walking barefoot across those hot coals. And so again, it's the internal confidence that they have in themselves. I want to get your thoughts there on internal confidence as a strength. Because I think we're getting to the point in our society where internally confident people are regressing in favor of inflated, confident people that have a air, a persona, a facade, maybe, if you will. I hope I'm going in the right direction, because I feel like you're really digging into something here that really just speaks to us as people getting back to real confidence and real strengths versus the perception of other people and what they think our strengths are. I know that's a lot to unpack, but
yeah,
I felt like the conversation is really, that's where this conversation is going and leading. And I love it. I love where it's leading.
Yeah. Let me see. Well, I guess thinking back to my personal example, some of the reasons why I might have felt, and I mean, and it took me a long time to realize all of these things and to verbalize them in a way that makes sense, that I, just did. A year ago, I would not have been able to actually express that verbally because I didn't understand it yet. So I'm still learning about myself and still learning how to articulate this. But what I would say is, I think the reason that I feel like I had a high degree of internal confidence and not as high of a degree of this external confidence that you might see of, like you said, people on social media, having these facades, whether they're authentic or not.
Yeah.
I think it's because I know that I'm young, and I know that age can be a factor of discrimination regardless of what age you are. But I think because I'm young, I look even younger than I actually am. And, I don't have 20 years of corporate experience like a lot of my colleagues do. And I think that my challenge with letting that internal confidence really shine externally as best as it could was because of those vulnerabilities that I felt like were hindering me.
Yeah.
So, and I think people, other people probably have the opposite. They might have, look great on paper. They might have worked at great companies. They might have written books. They might be really attractive and have great, social media, whatever it is. But then internally, they might really lack a lot of that confidence. But they know to the world that they look really great and that they have a great reputation and everything like that. So I've never thought about it kind of as internal and external until, this conversation right now. But I think that's a great way to highlight the fact that, there's kind of two ways to look at confidence, and then, how that affects you. Mm-hmm. And knowing that you have to find how to regulate both within yourself.
Well, Elena, it really comes down to, the fact of the matter is there's so many strategists out there. And again, I'm not saying anything about, I love what you do as far as people development. What I'm talking about is brand strategists or market strategists. Mm-hmm. To your point, to your very well-made point about people building what they want someone to look like, or a brand to look like, or a personal brand to look like. Mm-hmm. And it's, the right picture, the right wording, the right LinkedIn profile, the right this, the right that, instead of using probably the greatest strength that a person can have, which is authenticity. Mm-hmm. Being who you are, being transparent, being that person that says, hey, look, I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to be authentic.
Right.
When you work with clients, let's go here for a second. When you work with your clients, what's the one thing that most people say they want to develop within themselves when they work with you?
Really, it's the basics: fulfillment, satisfaction in what they do, happiness, a sense of giving back to the people that they serve. And not to say that a lot of them don't already have that in whatever it is that they're doing or whatever challenge they're coming to me with. But at the core of it, that's really what most people, I think, are pursuing.
I've got one more question before we take a break. And I'm curious about this. If Elena Pastore were a client of Elena Pastore's, what is the one question that you would ask of yourself because I know, when you talk to clients, you say, what do you want to get out of this? If you could coach yourself a year ago, what strengths would you have developed within yourself as you were coaching you maybe a year or two ago?
Wow, it's a pretty deep one. It makes it a little easier to answer because I do have a coach that has helped me through starting my business. And he's worked with me on limiting beliefs. So if I could have coached myself a year or 2 years ago, I would have tried to expose those limiting beliefs within myself and asked myself, why do I feel, guilt, fear around certain elements of starting a business, doing business, having certain relationships, business relationships. And of course, to every business problem, there's always a personal problem. So I would have asked myself why I was limiting myself based on those fears and guilt that I was feeling, and would have worked with myself to get to the bottom of those so I could show up more authentically and more confidently for my clients.
I've got one more question, and I
Okay.
promise we'll get a break. Where do you see the business of people development going in the next 5 years or so? Because I think where you're at is really good, because again, if we can, if leaders can tap into more of their strengths, obviously their people get better. If an entrepreneur can tap into more of their strengths, their business gets better. And therefore they can serve people better. They can serve their customers better. They can do greater things. Where do you see people development going in the next 5 years? And what's the one problem that you feel like that your industry, coaching and things like that, what's the one need that you feel like you'll be able to solve?
I definitely see the industry growing, especially as remote work takes off more and it becomes more and more of a candidate's market. I think a lot of companies, and I'm speaking mostly businesses, companies, larger organizations, I think are missing out on capitalizing on the existing talent that they have, and that seeking a solution, which is being proactive about developing their people, seeking that solution only really comes after they experience a pain of high turnover, low performance, poor management, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's difficult because it's a hard sell unless someone has experienced that pain and is seeking a solution for it. But I think that as more companies, like I said, experience the pain of the candidates market because of the remote work being so much more available and becoming more normal, I think that they will realize creating strong organizational cultures and cultures that harness your talents, harness leadership, develop, all of the above organizationally. I think this industry will be more, I guess, sought after in the next 5 years as a result of those things, which I love because I think they're of course necessary regardless, but I think more people will see the value in it over the next few years.
Well, there's definitely, listen, if organizations are not intentional about developing people,
yes,
you're going to, it's the old axiom, if you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got.
Right.
And so if you're not intentional as a leader about growing your people, then, how do you ever expect to continue to get to different levels and things like that? Let's step aside, take a break, because I want to leave room for you to tell your story. And again, you've hit on it just a little bit. We'll go a little bit deeper as well. My guest, people development strategist Elena Pastore, joins me on the Intentional Encourager podcast. Back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, Brian Sexton. I want to take a moment and tell you about my friend Harry Spate and his new book, Selling with Dignity. Harry has taken an age-old concept of sales and he's put a new twist to it, and I love the direction that he's taken with Selling with Dignity. And here's what's encouraging about Harry's book. Instead of viewing people as numbers and machines, salespeople are now given the tools and the encouragement to be dignified in their approach. Here's what Harry says. He says, selling is an honorable profession when it's done right. When sellers feel they are valuable and have integrity and respect, this opens the door for better conversations and eventually relationship. This book puts an end to sleazy sales tactics and proves why selling with dignity can be done, and it leads to massive success. And I couldn't agree more. Go to sellingwithdignity.com, get your copy today, and if you want Harry to sign it, he'll do that for you. Again, go to sellingwithdignity.com and pick up your copy today of the new book by Harry Spate, Selling with Dignity. And now let's get back to more great conversation here on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Elena, let's tell your story. And I want to, and again, I want to save room for you to go back as far as you want to go. But again, I'll jump in with questions, as you talk about things. But again, go back as far back as you want to go and tell your story.
All right. So I've listened to other episodes of yours, and when people tell their story, they usually have this, big moment where it was either a high point or a low point, and it was something really, really exceptional, I guess, that happened in their life. And I don't know, I don't really have one particular thing that I would go back to as a real turning point in my life, I guess. But I guess I'll start, in my childhood. The biggest thing that happened, my father passed away when I was 8, and I was the oldest of 3 siblings. So I was 8, and I had a sister that was 5 and a brother that was not even a year old yet. So that was, really tough. And like you, Brian, my family is Christian, well, Catholic. I went to Catholic school my whole life. So faith was something that we relied on a lot, go to church, everything like that to help us get through.
Do you remember much about your dad? Do you remember, that time? Because I lost my dad at 40. I cannot imagine losing my dad at 8. Do you remember what was that like for you? You're the oldest of 3. You have a brother that's a year old. So, I mean, just a wee little guy.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you have more of that bank of memories than maybe, your other 2 siblings. Mm-hmm. What was that time like for you and your family? And what was that like for you being so young and experiencing loss that young at that young of an age?
Yeah, I do have memories. When you're 8, you can kind of remember some things, especially when it's something that's profound. So I do have memories, some, and we have, of course, pictures and videos, but I'm sorry, what was the second part of what you asked?
Well, again, it's traumatic losing
a parent.
What
was it like?
Yeah. For you, when you think back to that time, what do you remember most about that time? I mean, my heart just breaks because I cannot imagine being that little and just going through something that traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so I guess I'll also add, it was sudden, it was unexpected. So it was not like it was anything we saw coming. But, when you're 8, you can understand that when someone dies, it means they're not coming back. But I, of course, didn't understand the social, financial, economic implications that had. Like that was not even a thought for me. All I could really grasp was this person isn't coming back and isn't going to be part of my life anymore. And that's obviously very hard, and was hard, growing up and being the oldest and helping taking care of the other 2. So I definitely grew up a lot, I think, through that process. But the other thing is that when you're 8, you don't understand at all about, what type of person was he? What was his character? What was he like? Who was he? You can't really be a judge of character when you're so young. So, my dad was, he was in politics. He was the president of the city council where we grew up. He was also a banker of a local bank. And when he passed, there were a handful of articles written about him and about how he touched the community, and people that knew him that just wrote little excerpts, and it was in this article. And I read it every year. And every year that I read it, I feel like I learned something new about, who he really was and about who I want to be and how I want to, kind of carry on his legacy. And some of the highlights of over the years, the things that I, like I said, continuously read year after year, is that he was very, big into servant leadership, serving people, just being a good person and, you know, I don't know how to phrase it better, kind of generic, but just the common themes of the things that people said about him inspire me to touch people's lives in the way that he did, in the ways that I read about, but I didn't actually get to see. So
If you
that's
could,
my,
forgive me for interrupting.
no, interrupt, it's fine.
If you could sit down with your dad right now and you had 5 minutes, what's one question you'd ask him?
Trying to think of just one.
Because you've started your business. Your dad was obviously actively involved in business. You know, there might be that business angle. You know, it might be the
Right.
angle of, you know, hey, what do you think about, you know, your dad was heavily involved in politics, like you mentioned. Maybe you want to ask him a political question or something like that. You know, and I've thought about that. And the reason that I ask is that having lost my dad, you know, and it's been almost 10 years ago for me now, if I had that opportunity, I might ask my dad, like, hey, you know what? How do you think the last 10 years have turned out for your boy here? You know, I might do something like that. But, and again, I don't want, I know that's emotional, but I think there's a lot of people that if we just kind of looked at it at ourselves and said, okay, if we could have 5 minutes with that loved one and maybe ask them a question or just something like that, that's just something I think about. I don't know if you've ever thought about that, and forgive me for sparking emotion there, but you know, when you talk about your business and things like that, I mean, obviously your dad had a huge impact on businesses in the banking industry and in the community you grew up in. You mentioned that you continue to learn something about him every year when you read things. I just wonder if that thought ever crossed your mind of, hey, there's one thing I'd love to ask you if I could.
Yeah. I haven't, to be honest, I really haven't thought about it, but it's a good thing to think about. But I would probably ask, how to live a good, happy life in the way that I think he did, and how to sustain that, because, you know, like I said, the work that I do and the end goal of, you know, what I hope my clients find after our time together is really happiness and fulfillment in their work. And of course, as it trickles over into their personal life. And I think a job really should be about how you can monetize something you love and add value to, you know, the world or to someone else or another organization or, you know, whatever it is. And I believe everyone can be happy and do something they love and find a way to give, you know, value to that. And I just think happiness and fulfillment is the core of living a great life. And I would probably ask him how I think he did that, at least in his life. So that's probably what I would ask.
Did you find, and again, was it easy for you to kind of go in your own path? Because there are some times when children lose parents earlier in life that they tend, or, you know, children just naturally start to gravitate to what their parents did or do.
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, I was a journalism major in college. And then I decided, well, my dad was a salesperson. My uncles were salespeople. I could just go that way. And that's what I did. I kind of followed that laid out path. When you think about the path that you took, was it easier for you to kind of go in your own direction, or did you ever feel that pull maybe to go into banking or to pursue something politically or things like that? Did you ever kind of feel that tug or that pull to follow in those footsteps?
Well, more so than my mom. So my mom is an optometrist, and a pharmacist, and I am terrible at science. So that would not have worked out at all. But when I was in eighth grade, my friends used to say that I would be the first female president of the country, which, I'm definitely not going into politics. So that won't happen either. But yeah, banking, I
There are
mean,
quite a
he was,
few
of course,
people
the
in the
more
White
business
House
time.
you could help develop. I'm quite sure that you could work very well with them and develop them and their strengths.
Yeah, I mean, as far as politics goes, I like the idea of, politicians are really supposed to serve their people and their community and take action on behalf of what the people want. So, I just think politics is so tough, especially in today's day and age. It's so, I don't know what
Well,
word I want to use.
I love where this is going. Let's go here for a second. Okay. You're 100% right. Is that it almost feels like, again, that when you are elected to office, you're supposed to do what strategists think and not, I know you're a people
Right.
development strategist, but again, it's almost kind of like you lose the authenticity that you wanted to run on so people could elect you so that you could do what you were purposeful about doing. It's almost kind of like you lose yourself instead of, it almost feels like politics should be the opposite. Like, hey, develop the strengths that resonate most with the people that you're elected to serve, not the other way around. It would almost be like getting hired by a company and they hired you because they like this about you. And then when you actually got into the company, you go, well, hang on a second. I'm going to do the exact opposite of why you hired me and the strengths that you hired me for. Like, I feel like I should do this instead of what you hired me for. Does that make sense? I mean, I think you've hit on something there that's really, I think, really important to understand, is staying true to yourself and staying true to what got you to the point of success and developing those strengths instead of scrapping everything else and doing something completely opposite. Does that make sense?
I think so, a little bit.
We
I don't
try
know.
to
I
make
mean,
sense here on the Intentional Encourager podcast. No, because Elena and I didn't mean to take our conversation in a different
no, no, no,
direction,
no. It's fine.
but it's, I love what the idea and the concept is that there are a lot of areas in life, in business, and politics where we've forgotten who we serve.
Mm-hmm.
We've
Mm-hmm.
forgotten that leaders serve the people that work for them, and making them better is a core necessity of leadership, making your people
Right.
better.
Right.
Politicians have forgotten who they serve. It's not about lobbyists, it's about your constituents.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost feels like you're scrapping the strengths that make you successful, that get you to that level, so that you can take on all these other
I
strengths that
see.
really don't matter in the
Yeah.
grand scheme of things.
Yeah. I
Where do
see what
you
you're
think
saying.
that comes from? Working with people like you work with people, where do you think that deficiency comes? Because it's not a strength, it's a deficiency. Where do you think that deficiency comes from?
What do you mean? Which
I believe here's what I believe. And again, folks, thank you for riding this wave with us, because I love where this is going. When I look at someone who says, if you want a great leader, elect
mm-hmm.
me. If you want a
Mm-hmm.
great leader, choose me. So in
Mm-hmm.
other words, they're telling you, I'm a great leader, trust me.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't give me anything that demonstrates their leadership. So in other words, they're just telling me that they're good at something without showing me that they're good at something. To me, that isn't a strength. It becomes a deficiency, because if I can't see it, how can I connect to it? Or how can I know what it looks like in you if I can't see it in you? And I feel like a lot of times that people mean well when they pursue those things, whether they're promoted into a leadership position in their company, or they're elected an elected politician. It's like, okay, I'm here. Now I'm going to do everything else differently now that I'm here than everything that I did to get there that resonated and connected and made me the leader that people thought I was that I was supposed to be. And it just feels like a lot of times leaders feel like they have to adapt and mold themselves once they get there, and kind of scrap and forget everything, that the strengths that they built along the way to get them to that position. Do you feel like that's a deficiency in people? Let me ask it this way. Is that a correctable deficiency in people?
So I don't think people intentionally say, hey, this is going to be my campaign. Again, politics.
No, this is fascinating conversation. This is really fascinating.
Regardless of the position, regardless of the context, whether it's in a company, politically, whatever, this happens all the time. I don't think people set out to say, okay, people, this is what I'm going to do. And then once I'm in this, okay, psych, I'm not going to do any of that. Full view. I don't think, for most of the time, I don't think that's people's intention. At least I hope not. At least I think most people, I don't think they intend to fool people just to get into a position. Right. I like to think people have pure intentions, and it's just their flaws that get in the way of them actually executing what it is they say they're going to do. But I do think this brings us full circle back to what we talked about at the beginning about that external versus the internal confidence. And I think that strength that you're talking about isn't necessarily that they are the good leader or they are, the servant, but it's that they're good at talking about it, or they know the right words to say. And that's the strength. Maybe not that they're actually good at it. And, who knows? Again, this applies to various contexts. So I think lack of awareness around what it actually takes to get some of those promises implemented and see them to fruition, other personal flaws, or like I said before, limiting beliefs that again prevent you from doing those things. So I don't think people really intend to say, haha, I fooled you,
Well, again, I think you're, and forgive me for going a little long with the conversation.
No, it's okay.
This is really important, because now let's take it to the world of business, is that a lot of people look at certain professions in business, and I'll say sales, marketing, and they'll say, you told me this and you delivered this. To your point about intention, you might have intended to deliver an incredible experience based on what you felt like you could do, and it fell woefully short. Or maybe you did intend, because your buying experience or your product, you knew it was subpar, but you had to oversell it to get people to come to the table and buy it, and you'll deal with the fallout later. And I think we've got a remnant of business like that. And we've got a remnant of leadership like that, that would be what I would call a trick artist. Like, hey, watch me saw the lady in half, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat. Not, fully intending not to deliver on that thing there. And again, Elena, I think it's so fascinating that at the point of life that you are, and the way that you think about these things like that, it's obvious that even though your father wasn't around for most of your life, that influence is still shaping you. And I love that. I love that part of it. And I love what you said about just making sure, knowing what you say, being aware of the things that you say, and being aware of how, when they're said, that people will hold on to those things. They will hold you to that standard and things like that. We could go on forever. I want to be cognizant of the time. This is fascinating conversation. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have. Elena, I would be remiss if you did not share with us your biggest piece of intentional encouragement for folks that maybe want to develop themselves, or they're just kind of in that crossroads of, hey, I know I want to take myself, my personal growth and things like that to the next level. What's your biggest piece of intentional encouragement?
My intentional encouragement would be to not get in your own way. And I'm sure a lot of you may have heard that in one way or another, but truly, in my work of helping people develop themselves, the biggest challenge is people getting in their own way. So believe that you can, because the power of the mind is so strong, and don't let anything hold you back.
That is so good. That is what a great way to end our conversation. Tell folks how they can connect with you, how they can find your resources. Where can they get more of Elena Pastore?
Yeah, my email is the best way to contact me. It's elena@elenapastore.com. And as Brian mentioned earlier, my LinkedIn is also a great way to contact me. So it's linkedin.com/in/Elena Pastore, and my website, elenapastore.com.
That is so good. I am so glad that we made this conversation happen. Elena, this has been fascinating. I don't know. I hope you've enjoyed it. To me, it's been fascinating, the conversation that we've had. And again, folks, I would encourage you to connect with folks like Elena. If you really wanted to really hone in deeper, stronger on what your strengths are, get with someone like Elena that can help you find that out. Elena Pastore, thank you for joining me on the Intentional Encourager podcast.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
My thanks as always to producer Bryce Sexton and technical advisor Matt Means. And of course, the ultimate thanks goes to the Lord Jesus Christ, who provides intentional encouragement every day through his word. If you're not subscribed to the Intentional Encourager podcast, hit the subscribe button wherever you get podcasts so you don't miss an exciting episode where you can get encouraged and stay encouraged. And remember, anyone, anywhere, at any time, any place can be an intentional encourager.